Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Katherine and I'm currently a third-year PhD candidate studying history at The Ohio State University. My specific subfield is modern European history with a focus on women in World War I. So today we are going to talk all about comprehensive exams, candidacy exams, general exams, everything you need to know. I just passed my exams a week ago from when this was filmed, so I'm going to give you all the details about what are exams, what are reading lists, how I prepared for the exam, my exam experience, and things that I would recommend or lessons I took away from the whole experience. So let's get right into the first part of the video. What are exams? So first off, these exams go by many different names. At OSU, a lot of times we call them generals, but when you're applying for all of the forms and everything, they're also known as comprehensive exams or candidacy exams. I think the most apt term would be candidacy exams, because once you take these exams, you move from a PhD student to a PhD candidate. And after this moment, you are what's considered ABD status, which means all but dissertation. So you've finished your coursework side of things, you've finished your language requirements, all of that good stuff, and all you have left is to do your research and write your dissertation. Now, I still have like 4 years left in my program. A lot of times people take them either in their second or third year. I think it's most common to take them in your third year. I was a little bit of fast-tracked, so that's where I ended up. It's important to remember that exams vary greatly depending on the program, the department, the school that you are in. So my experience is my experience only. It will give you a little insight into how some of the exams go, but remember, these do vary by schools. So for my exams, I am examined on a major field and 2 minor fields. And for each field, you work with certain professors that you choose in the department to create a reading list. So for my major field, I had modern European history, and for the major field you have 2 advisors. So I had 2 professors, and we worked together to create a reading list of about 100 books. Yes, that is a lot of books. It can be broken down into a lot of different categories, and you can organize the lists in different ways. We organized my list by time period and by country. So we had state formations and revolutions, we had the long 19th century, we had the fin de siècle, we had World War I and the interwar years, World War II, and then post-war. Within each of those sections, we had books on France, Germany, and Britain. The exam was mostly kind of an even balance between France and Germany, and then Britain had way less books. Maybe 3 to 4 books max in every section, whereas for my books for France and Germany, it was more like 6, 7, 8 books for each section. So that was my major field, and then my 2 minor fields were military history and then women and gender history. For each of these lists, I had about 50 books. These 2 lists were both organized thematically rather than by time period. I can't remember exactly, but I will post some pictures of what my lists look like. I have like so many allergies today, so I keep having to break to sneeze. Okay, so the process of making lists also varies greatly. Even within the department, it's extremely specific to that professor. Most of my professors end up having the same kind of style, I would say, except for maybe my German subfield. But for most of them, I was asked to come up with a list of books myself. Generally, the lists weren't that great because I didn't know what I'm doing. I didn't even know what a list looked like. So a piece of advice is to reach out to other people in your department who have already taken the exam and ask for an example list. just to get an idea of kind of what are the main books you think you should be reading, but also just to see what a list looks like. That's what I did as kind of like a first stepping ground. And then from there, it was a little bit of a back and forth with my professors. So they would suggest some books, take some books off, suggest some books, put some books on, and it kind of went like that until we solidified on a section of books. Okay, so once you have made your reading list, it is time for the preparation. So to prepare, I ended up having an independent study with 3 out of the 4 committee members, and the 4th committee member I had 3 classes with, so I think we already just kind of knew the kind of student I was and the kind of preparation I was doing, and I knew the kind of questions that this professor would likely be asking me. So for my prep, I used Microsoft OneNote, which I would highly suggest. I know a lot of study tubers use Notion. I like Notion for a lot of different things, but personally I haven't found a good way for my brain to kind of use it for notes and things like that. So if you're looking for something different, something else, I would suggest Microsoft OneNote. I have explained previously how I used it and how I organized it, but I had each of my major fields there, and then I organized by theme or section or country, and it was a great way to keep all my notes in one place. I took notes on my books exactly in the same format every single time with the focus. I had like a layout at the front with like topic, argument, historiography, methodology, sources, which was helpful in the final stages when I was kind of doing my flash studying and just needed to see the argument of each book. So yes, I use Microsoft OneNote. In the independent studies, they all kind of function differently. For 2 of them, we were going through the whole list during our independent study. So we would read like 7 to 8 books every few weeks. For another one of my independent studies, we just did a few books from each section, and then I was left to read the rest on my own the semester after. So we read more like 2 to 3 books every 2 weeks. I had to pick up the pace a lot the semester before the exam, and I was reading 6 books a week, probably, essentially a book a day, particularly in the final phases. As far as preparing with each professor, again, this is highly professor dependent. But as we kind of went through the books and my professors would ask me questions, I would kind of be alerted to questions that I thought they might ask in the exam. But then before the exam, we had a specific day where we went through and they told me the questions that they would be asking me, which is extremely nice and generous. They didn't necessarily ask them in the exact way that we had talked about, but I knew the themes and questions that would be important to them. For my major field, I was given a list of 7 to 8 questions, I believe, that could be asked on the written portion, and there were a few questions that weren't ones that we had discussed, but I had options for the written portion. So my studying essentially had 2 phases. I had the reading the books phase, and then I had the studying phase. So once I got through reading all the books, I would say I had about 5 weeks to study. So I had completed all the books for one of my minor fields last summer. I completed the books for like half of my major field in the fall, but I was still left with probably 100 books to read in the spring semester leading up to my exam. So I was like really hitting the pavement hard. But once I was done, I did leave myself about 5 weeks to study, which I, in hindsight, think was a good amount. I originally thought that it was not enough, but for me, a month was just the right amount of time, because by the end, I was so sick of the material that I didn't even like studying anymore. So in the study phase, I went back first and kind of reviewed the arguments for each of the books, and then I tried to find the big historiographical trends that I thought were important to me, that had come out of the readings throughout the semester and the year, and what I thought would be important to get a grasp on each field. So once I kind of had those, I then focused specifically on the questions that I believed I was going to be asked, which, like I said, were kind of predetermined to a certain extent. And I just would go through and constantly review the arguments, the trends that I saw, the authors, the books, and would just go through that constantly. I had some flashcards, but I didn't really use them as much. It was mostly just prepping, going through all the information again. I would do kind of writing drills where I would have one topic and physically write out everything that I thought was important to a question. And then I also had a Word document that I worked on creating of all the questions, and then I printed that out and would take notes and also use that in my studying. The last thing I did that I wish I would have done a little bit more of in a little bit of a different way was to prepare for the oral portion of the exam. I had friends and family ask me the questions and I would respond. I love my family so much and they were super great with helping me and giving me practice. But the one thing I later realized I kind of missed by not studying with someone who knew the material was pushing me and asking me follow-up questions, which I got when I studied with my friend Sydney and my friend Justin. But if the person doesn't really know history, it can be kind of difficult for them to push back on you on your answers, which was important for me in the exam, because when I feel pushed, I kind of like fall apart. But you need to be able to learn how to respond to follow-up questions. So I wish I would have done a little bit more of that in my prep. That being said, the oral portion was a big part of preparing and kind of going through that. So I hope that I kind of explained my preparing part well enough. If I missed out on anything or you're curious about anything, please let me know in the comments. But yeah, essentially just read through all the books and then had 5 weeks to study for all the questions I was going to be asked. So let's finally move into the exam experience portion. Okay, so what are the exams specifically? After you have these subfields, the exam is broken into 2 parts. You have a written exam and an oral exam. The written exam is specifically focused on your major field. So I had a written exam over modern European history. You are given 48 hours to write about 20 pages of material. How that 20 pages is broken down kind of depends. I had 2 essays of roughly 10 pages each to write over the 48-hour period. I had another friend who took the exam a week before me, and with his advisors, they had given him 4 questions. So I think that's roughly 5 pages each. It really just depends how they want to do it, but it's usually 48 hours to write 20 pages over your major field. Then a few weeks later, anywhere in between 1 to 2 or 3 weeks later, you will take the oral part of your exam, and the dates are chosen by you and your committee. There ended up being a little less than a week in between my writtens and my orals, which was really tight, but that's just the way things kind of panned out and had to be with my research trip this summer to France. So I had my oral part of the exam the following week. The oral exam is focused on your major field, your minor field, a syllabus that you've written for one of your minor fields, and your prospectus. So for the major field, each advisor had, I think, 20 to 30 minutes to go over questions that they had for me over the written portion of my exam and the books that I'd read, while each minor field had 20 minutes, and then we had 20 minutes left over for my prospectus. For my school, you can pick the start time that you would like your 48 hours to start, so I would suggest that you pick hours that you know you work best in. I, as I have explained many times on this channel, am a 9 to 5 kind of girl, even though I definitely work past 5. Having that mindset works for me, so my exam opened at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I had until 9 a.m. on a Thursday to return the answers. So I opened the document with the questions a little before 9 a.m. is when they sent them out, and I read the questions and made a strategy. I decided I was going to work on one of the questions for the first day and the second question on the second day. So for the first day, I wrote the entire answer to the first question, And then that evening I made an outline and started culling quotes and important information for my second essay. So that actually made my writing day on day 2 a little bit easier. I woke up, I didn't have to plan or anything. I just got straight into the writing and spent the entire second day writing the second essay. And then I went back and made edits and read over the questions for both day 1 and day 2. I ended up finishing the exam around 5 or 6 p.m. and then took a break for a few hours and then went back and read things again. Once I read the exam over after I had already turned it in, I did realize a few different typo errors, but it happens. You're writing quickly in a very short time span, so you deal with what you have. So I finished the written portion and emailed it and immediately got back confirmation from all the professors like, thanks, got your portfolio, see you on Tuesday, which is when my oral exam was going to be. I was very glad that they provided this confirmation right away because I was very insecure about the written portion of my exam. I started panicking, thinking that I didn't write it how you're supposed to write it, which how are you supposed to write it? I have no idea. But I was so stressed and was literally like crying to my boyfriend, like, if I don't pass this and advance to the oral stage of the exam, I literally can't do it anymore. Like, I won't take the exam a second time, I'll be dropping out. I was so dramatic. Because sometimes if they read your written work, they don't advance you to the oral stage because if they think that you won't pass, they want to give you a second chance. That didn't happen. They confirmed and we were still scheduled for the Tuesday part of the oral examination. So I mentioned portfolio when I said I turned it in. A little sidebar that OSU also requires is when you turn in your examination, for each field you must create a portfolio of all the written work you've produced during your time at OSU that is relevant to that field. So my major field portfolio had probably 6 papers and my prospectus and clocked in at around 200 pages and each minor field was about 40 pages. So I then finished on Wednesday. I took all of Thursday completely off. I did nothing related to studying. I had a day where I just unplugged and I will say it truly was the first day in months that I didn't go 2 minutes without thinking about the exam. I was truly able to shut off my brain, which was a glorious miracle, and I'm glad I took that day to recover. Then on the weekend, it was back into prep mode for the orals, which I had already been doing, but I wanted to just shore up some things, read over my essays to make sure that I knew what I had written because I knew that they were going to ask me questions about that. And then on Tuesday, it was time for the oral examination. So the oral examination takes place over 2 hours. So again, you can schedule it at any time. If I were to go back, I would have picked a different time. I scheduled my exam from 2 to 4. I think I did that to give myself kind of the slow morning to get ready, have a nice lunch. No, I would have done it from like 10 to noon if I could have picked a different time, because then I was so antsy in the morning just waiting to take it. I wish I could have gotten it over with. But the exam was from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. When I first arrived, I was sent out of the room while they had a little discussion and maybe strategy section for how they were going to proceed, and then I came back in and the questions began. So like I said, I had major field and then each minor field, and then we left about 20 minutes for my prospectus. As far as my experience with the oral exam, I thought I might cry before because I cry at literally anything. It's just how I express emotions, whether I am happy, sad, overwhelmed. I did not cry, which was great. I did feel very fidgety though. I had my hands beneath the desk, kind of just like pinching myself and doing things to kind of like keep me awake, focused, and on task, but also like because I was nervous. There were definitely questions that I didn't know how to answer, and I did my best to either come up with an answer, or once or twice I said, you know, I don't really remember. I didn't focus on that in my studies, or that didn't stick out to me. At one point I even said I wouldn't feel comfortable just like coming up with an answer because I didn't want to totally BS and be wrong, which worked out well because I was still able to answer a lot of other questions, and they didn't care that I couldn't answer all of them. And usually if I didn't answer exactly how they wanted, they would just tell me what they were looking for or kind of say what their thoughts were. I was very overwhelmed with the questions at times if they were questions that I didn't expect, particularly if they were phrased in a way that I wasn't expecting. But I did have a notebook and a sheet of paper with me that they allowed me to have, so I would jot down the questions as they asked them, and then if I thought of like the 3 points I wanted to say, I would just write like 1 or 2 words, which was extremely helpful. And, you know, once or twice I said, let me think about this for a moment, kind of collected my thoughts, and then proceeded. And that was amazing for me to be able to kind of collect myself. I would say, don't be afraid to give yourself space. This is one of the few times in probably your career that you'll be expected to know as much information as you are and have 0 notes or anything in front of you. So, you know, if you need to take a moment to breathe and collect your thoughts, do it. I did, and it was great. I would also suggest having a notebook with you because they might give you suggestions about research and things, and especially for my prospectus part, I was writing down so many different suggestions that they were giving me, particularly because many of the professors besides my advisor hadn't read my prospectus previously, so it was kind of fresh for them. So then at the end of the time period, I was again asked to leave the room, which was probably the most nerve-wracking part. I just decided to go to the bathroom, but this is like partially a formality, and by the time I got out of the bathroom, they were already ready for me, and when I went back in, they were clapping and said, congratulations, you passed, and they were already going in on the computer and submitting the forms, which was very exciting. And I was very happy because, again, I was nervous. I didn't think that I would fail, but it was still quite nerve-wracking, and I was very glad it was over. So that is my experience with my exams. If you guys have any further questions that I didn't quite get to, please, please, please leave a comment down below, and I will do my best to respond to you. I think the exams are some of the most elusive part of being a PhD student, and I think it is really a disservice that the exams aren't talked about more and people are really kind of left in the dark. So I want to help others know how to navigate this stage of their PhD. So if you have any other questions, please leave them down below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!